Indians are great influencers, no? So I think. Anyway, I don't think you need to worry too much about time because, you know, if you can't accomplish a particular work this life, you have next life and the next, so, you know, why hurry? Don't worry. I think this is going to be one of the most interesting sessions as well. And it's all about tapping global talent. Are we ignoring inherent talent in India? How do 1,000 more Shekhar Kapurs, you can clone, N.A.R. Rahmans, find their way into international arena? How do representations operate in the dynamics? Are they doing enough? How about taking to social media for talent management? So in this session, we plan to discuss or say explore ways to access emerging talent in India that is conscious of global storytelling, give an overview of the issues for the talent flow across borders and resulting implications, discuss prevalent issues surrounding intellectual property. I think these are some of the issues that I'm reading out this because most people have book, but most people don't have enough time to read. So
can I ask
make
David
sure as a lawyer that
can I ask
reads.
David a very strong question?
Yeah.
David is from CAA, right? CAA know that 80% of the world's, of Hollywood's cinema market is outside the United States. And yet 85 to 90% of their talent management is within the United States. What's going wrong with CAA, and why is it not folding up?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I prepared a specific response. Actually, you know, I appreciate that we start the conversation that way, because the one thing that I will like to say, and of course I'm here to evangelize, you know, the virtues of being connected to CAA, but the reality is, I think that the leadership of CAA have recognized that, and they've made a conscious decision to expand our resources, relationships, and capabilities internationally. And I think our partnership with Kwan and the JV that we established in India is indicative of that, I think, forward thinking on the part of the leadership. I think everyone recognizes that, you know, gone are the days where, you know, 75% of the box office comes from the domestic territory here in the United States. And in actuality, the exact opposite exists right now. 75% comes from international markets and only 25% comes, making, of course, the concept of international resources and capabilities all the more significant. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
But you're still not 80% in the international market.
Yeah, but we're heading
I mean, let's
there.
look at CAA buildings, right?
Yeah, but you know, the thing is I think that people might not understand sort of the operation that we've established in that market right now, and it's growing rapidly, and we're actually seeing significant success. I think we're actually exceeding the success that we anticipated. You know, having 125 employees running around India from Delhi, Mumbai, and Hyderabad, I think that we're trying to build the type of infrastructure that would actually support a continued growth where we represent local talent for local opportunity, because candidly, while I know we're talking about cross-border opportunities, I think that we also have to be very respectful to the fact that you can go into a foreign market and have a domestic business, like I said, where you represent local talent for local opportunity. Being an international organization, you can then layer the international resources on top of that domestic business, and that's when I think you could see some of the most significant impact.
So everybody who's joined CAA in India, right?
Yeah.
They feel that, okay, so why would we join? Well, maybe CAA will help us go international.
Yeah.
Not one of them has gone international yet.
Well, that's not true, actually. There are
Sorry,
several
I'm provoking you to say it,
Yeah,
right?
okay. There are several examples. And, you know, being put on the spot, not being prepared, and not wanting to offend those that I don't mention. But, you know, I think if we talk about talent, and maybe I'll just sort of jump into my very short portion today, but if we talk about talent, we have to look at the definition of talent, right? Talent could be defined any way you want, right? You can talk about a writer, you can talk about a director, you can talk about an actor or a performer, or you can talk about a brand, or you can talk about a licensing opportunity, intellectual property generally even. One of the things that I'd like to see is, you know, people automatically assume that if you go establish a beachhead in a market, it's about bringing talent into your domestic market, rather than looking at that market by itself and determining the value that it has by having a local business. So one of the things that the way that I like to acknowledge talent or to define talent is by saying, talent is not just one person necessarily, it's kind of a group of people. And I think that if we look at it suddenly becoming a global entertainment market, we don't necessarily have to look at one person making the decisions for a piece of content that could have exploitation opportunities globally. You got to think about bringing creative partnerships together. And that's what I think, if we talk about the world being truly flat, and we talk about, if you look at, there's been a lot of debate about India and China and the comparison between the two. The one thing that's obvious, at least to me, is Indians love Indian content, and Chinese, of course, love Chinese content, but they also really love Hollywood content, right? So you have to be very particular about your approach to the market. I believe in the concept of international creative collaborations, and there's an example, and we've got some partners in the room here with Ivanhoe and Jason Blum, who's speaking this afternoon. That's just one of many examples where we've taken a really good idea, identifying the right parties, all of whom have interests aligned, and bringing them together to create something that will not only have meaningful impact in the domestic market of India, but it will have a very meaningful exploitation and exportation out of the rest of the world. The deal that I was referring to was announced a couple of weeks ago, which is creating a slate of genre films for India by taking the leaders of their respective fields, bringing them together. Ivanhoe doing amazing work in terms of investing in emerging markets on the film front, and also production sources. They're sourcing amazing IP properties for exploitation globally. You've got Jason Blum, who's sort of a market leader when it comes to the horror genre. And then you've got Phantom Films, which is a company that's spearheaded by 4 very prominent filmmakers in the market. You bring all 3 of those parties together, you establish a vehicle where you're going to be financing, a slate of 10 horror films for the market, with the understanding that that IP will have relevance in that market, but also beyond. I think that you will see, and I'm making a huge prediction here, but I think that you'll see a very meaningful reinvention of horror in that market. And that's just one genre. You can apply it across others as well.
Okay. Anjula, you took Priyanka Chopra, who's one of our biggest stars, and you put her as a singer, as a pop star in the international market. How far have you succeeded in doing so? And why did you take Priyanka? Why did you make that decision?
It actually goes back to a long time ago. I saw Priyanka in a movie called Bluffmaster. I wasn't even in entertainment. I had nothing to do with this business at that time. And I just saw her on a music video, and it was a spoof of a hip-hop thing. And I just thought she had that Western swag. And one of the things that I was going to talk about later is just the whole thing of...
Later is now.
Later is now, good point. So I will talk about it now. One of the things that I think is often missing and is the sort of downfall of these cross collaborations is sensibility. And given that Priyanka spent most of her years during her most informative years from the ages of 13 to 17 in America, she had that kind of Western sensibility, which I think for pop music in particular is really, really important. Because, so I saw her in that music video years and years ago, and I was like, oh, if I was ever to do anything in sort of cross-cultural pop culture, which I never thought I would be doing, she would be the one. And then years later, I'm sitting with Jimmy Iovine, and we'd just done the whole Jay Hall thing, and we'd just done a whole bunch of stuff with Slumdog Millionaire and Pussycat Dolls and A.R. Rahman, and we'd done all this stuff. And he just said to me, like, what's your dream? What's your dream project? And I was like, oh, I'd really love to make a pop star out here from India. And he wasn't, was anyone in mind? And I just came up with Priyanka. I was like, she's the one that's got that swag. I think she could carry it off. Like, I had no idea if she could sing. That doesn't always matter. But
just Anthony, go on then.
But to be clear, she can.
She can sing. David knows because he's been in the studio with us. But what was interesting,
you guys have to say that.
Because they represent her. No, but seriously. So then Salim and Suleiman, who are 2 amazing producers out of India, actually sent me a demo of Priyanka's. And I heard it, and I was like, damn, she really can sing. So we flew over to India, and we plucked her.
So what was the first meeting between Jimmy Iovine and Priyanka like? What happened?
It was really funny. We met at the Monkey Bar in New York, and I remember the first thing when she sat down, I think he was quite, blown away with how beautiful she is. And
What did you say?
He just sort of went, oh, like that. He was just like, oh,
okay.
oh, okay. And then he whispered, and he goes, does she speak English? And I was like, oh. I was like, did you know that India, and I start going into my lectures about, the largest speaking population in India. But no, I mean, it was great. Like, we talked about music, a lot of music, and we talked about her world and what it would take for her to come out of here. And the biggest challenge has been and always will be time. But yeah.
She doesn't have time to be a pop star in the U.S.?
She doesn't have time for anything.
Right.
But it's very challenging.
You got her onto the big game. That's amazing.
Sorry?
You got her onto the big game, didn't you?
It's the NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Well,
I mean, every pop star is trying to get onto it.
I know, and Rihanna just got, pulled out of it. She was taking Priyanka's slot, actually. Well, my strategy to everything that I do is analyzing pop culture. So with Priyanka, it's, one block at a time. Like, you have to look at pop culture, and you have to look at what's going on in it. So, and that was something that Jimmy taught me, actually. So when we were sitting there with Priyanka, and we were talking about her first record, which was called In My City, I just sat there and I said, well, what's the biggest sport in America? What's pop culture out here? What's everybody talking about from a sports standpoint? And it's NFL. So I was like, okay, well, we need to get on the NFL. And you know me, Shekhar, I'm kind of like, once I'm on something, I don't stop until I get it. So I didn't stop. And we actually had 2 seasons of the NFL.
Fantastic,
so it was great.
Yeah. So Datta, I've known you a long time, and in your private moments with a few drinks down, he comes to me and says, what do you want to be known as? I want to be known as the guy who beat CAA.
That's impossible. You can't beat CAA.
So what's your strategy? Why do you think you can beat CAA?
No, you can't. You
Well,
can't
then
beat
why are
CAA.
you in the business?
You get acquired by CAA.
Okay.
That's always a strategy. That's why I'm sitting next to David. No, our strategy is very simple. We felt content was very undervalued. We tried to start optioning scripts out there, and we thought that would be the model. Realized pretty quickly that we didn't have money, so we couldn't make movies. We weren't from the industry, so we couldn't call up Priyanka and ask her to be in our movies. So we said, who else is undervalued? Well, the people creating content are undervalued. So that got us into the business of representing content creators. And our strategy essentially is just focused on that. Let's focus on writers and directors and ultimately just the content. And a very simple examples where top-of-the-line talent in India is about 60 to 80% of production budget, where it's about 30 to 40% here. So we saw that as a gross overvaluation. No offense to the talent there. And we saw examples of writers, client that we represent who wrote a film that made, gosh, $25 million at the box office. It was made for about $5 million, and he got paid $10,000. So seeing this complete mismatch of talent and just financial opportunity, we thought that would be a good place to start.
So Robert, how are you going to change all this?
Well,
Do you think it needs changing? Do you think that the representation, because representation is no longer just representation. CA is actually a strategic company now. It strategizes, it creates deals, it looks at the future. Where are you going?
Well, I think the essence of being a talent representative in today's world is you can't draw the lines and say, well, this is where what we do ends, and this is where the difference between an agent and a manager and a lawyer even and a business partner, the lines always blur. And I think if you're looking forward on behalf of your clients, you have to support them in a very idiosyncratic way to the way that they operate in the world in which they are creating. What I do is extremely specific to film composers and television composers, visual media composers. So I think I have a different, slightly different perspective. It's very niche in terms of the world in which I operate. So my perspective is actually certainly much more limited than the other panelists, but ultimately what we are all doing, I think, is working on behalf of our artists that we represent and trying to get them the most that we can in terms of compensation, in terms of protecting their rights, in terms of ensuring their legacy over time, and I guess foremost, protecting their ability to create and to do what they want to do in their careers.
Are you editorial? Does Anthony come to you and play a piece of music and you say, it's terrible? Do you ever do that?
Well, Anthony could answer
Yes.
that. I don't think I've ever said that's terrible. I said maybe you could change that a tiny bit. But, you know, I think maybe I'm a little bit unique. I do have a musical background, unlike a lot of my competitors. But it helps me understand my clients', I think, emotional and artistic needs a bit more. It's really not necessary to what I do. It certainly makes it more enjoyable for me. But what I do first is try to find the jobs. You know, I scour the marketplace and see what projects are happening, and whether it's Hollywood films, Bollywood films, British films, European films, and then match my specific clients and who's available, who's interested, and try to find the opportunities that will allow them to express themselves.
And are you very careful of the clients you take? Because I will not enjoy this client.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we can probably all say that that's the most important personal decision that you make, because just like any business, we have a certain number of hours in the day that we can be productive, and for me especially, I want to make sure that that there's a balance between the business opportunities of working with somebody, but also life is too short. You know, you can't, at least I can't, work with people who I don't enjoy and really believe in as an artist and as a person.
David, let's get to IP. CA works with studios, right? Studios come to CA all the time. Anytime they want a big project, they'll probably call you. Who do you work for, the studio or the client?
That's a good question. You know, you have to have, I think that in order to have a successful project, you have to have someone who can enable you. And do you define the enabler as the person who's going to finance, produce, and distribute it, or do you define it as the person who's going to come up with the creative concept? I think that Datta touched on something, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up, and it's consistent with what you were just saying. I think that, you know, it's unquestionable now, whether you look at Hollywood, whether you look at other international markets that have their own domestic film and television businesses, that intellectual property is the most important thing. I think in India particularly, we're beginning to see a few interesting trends, one of which is you're seeing the trend, and that's why he was so smart in establishing Tulsea in the first place, but the trend away from an opening weekend being purely banked upon one actor. You know, we went through that in Hollywood, and now we've suddenly evolved. I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with banking on one actor, but the truth is actors themselves are actually pretty drawn to IP, filmmakers, directors. You look in the United States now, the most successful tween properties are all coming off of books that were highly successful. If you look at what's happening in India, it was a country that didn't focus primarily on development, you know, projects. It was at a very early stage a point-and-shoot industry, whereas now you've seen the rise in the prominence of the writer, the director, taking a more significant role. Have we gone all the way? Absolutely not. But I think that we're getting closer to it. Getting back to the concept of the studio, I think the studios realize that as well. Sometimes the studio, through their development group and their financing departments, have the opportunity to secure that IP, right? Sometimes they have to come to us because we represent the clients that control the IP. So I think that it's an industry that requires everyone to participate, and sometimes it gets a little top-heavy where, let's say, for example, the overall cost of a production is more favoring the talent. In that particular instance, it's unlikely that everybody will see the most significant benefit of the exploitation of that property. It should be nicely balanced, and there should be incentive. And I think that the studios take a similar approach. They want to make sure that when they vest talent, whether they're actors, writers, directors on a particular film project, I'm talking about film right now, that everyone has the opportunity to see some upside. I think that's beginning to happen in India too. I think that very prominent directors and writers are being recognized for their IP, and they're actually attracting the interest of A+ on-camera talent now for the first time. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's changing. I think that we've seen lack of, when you look across the value chain of development to distribution. When you look across the value chain of development to distribution, a few years ago, 5 years ago, no one really cared about the other party. But you're starting to see that transparency because, as David rightly said, there's enough to go around, and people are starting to realize that, as opposed to trying to hoard and then the content ultimately suffering, the film ultimately suffering.
And the theme of this unconference, is disruption. Is social media disrupting your model? I mean, you've entrenched yourself, most of us have entrenched ourselves in a model that says there's IP, there's studios, there's this, these are the methods of distribution. There is the content creator, then there's the gatekeeper, and then there's a content distributor. And now suddenly you realize that under your feet, the content creator and the content consumer are talking to each other and relating directly to each other.
You know, I just want to say one quick thing on that. I think the interesting thing, it depends on who you look at. And I'm giving you an example of a client that we work with in India. What's beginning to happen is that the distributor is also the content creator for the first time, right? I mean, we all know that a lot of people are saying, particularly online or via mobile distribution, that distribution itself is fungible. But what happens when you have a very prolific content creator who also happens to control a social media platform that could effectively by itself serve as the distribution of that content? You know, there's an example of
Beyonce's latest album.
Beyonce's latest album is a perfect example here. In India, looking at someone like Yo-Yo Honey Singh, you know, he did something pretty compelling. He actually went and recorded an entire album and financed, with very high production values, of the 8 songs, 4 music videos, and released them basically all at the same time through his own distribution network. I mean, his social media following is so profound in the market that he was able to take advantage of that. So there he was the financier, he was the content creator, he was the creative, and he was also the the distribution platform. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think now, you know, we've recognized the value of content being king and the content creators having a lot of currency, but when they also control the potential distribution platform, that changes the game.
Yeah, where does the agent come in?
We negotiated the deal with the record label.
All right, Datta's been talking a lot about writers, and you can talk about self-publishing and what happens when self-publishing is a fundamental thing, because you're actually putting writers and studios together, and suddenly the guy says, I don't need studios, I'll self-publish. The writer says, I'll publish my screenplay. Anyway, but I'm going to open it out, ask questions. You have them. I've never seen an agent sit here and open themselves out to questions. There they are.
Yeah. Gauri?
How important is it for your clients who are individuals for themselves to understand their own rights? For example, IP, what rights do they have for you to be able to negotiate on their behalf?
Directing the question at me? You want to take that?
Well, it's extremely important, I think, that we can only, it's extremely important because as the representatives, the more information and knowledge that our clients have, I think the more empowered we are to negotiate on their behalf and make the best deals that we can.
I think also in India with the new copyright law, there's still a lot of ambiguity around certain aspects of it. So I mean, even when we're negotiating deals on their behalf, a lot of the studios are saying, well, this is the way it is, and we say, no, this is the way it is, and we have to put in clauses that say, well, it'll depend on what happens with the copyright law. So a lot of things in India are in flux in relation to some of this litigation and policy.
And I think one more thing to add there, and Anjula, I don't know if you want to say anything on that point, but I've always found that our ability to aggressively negotiate on behalf of our clients is all dependent upon how much they empower us. In other words, they might say, okay, they're offering me 100,000 right now. Don't do anything to jeopardize this, but ask for more, but don't do anything to jeopardize. So our ability to be aggressive on their behalf may not have anything to do with the IP. In fact, the IP may be the fallout. It may be may be compromised in the process because they're motivated by something other than, you know, future ownership, something beyond just the immediate transaction. I'm not saying that's always the case, but our ability to be aggressive often is dependent upon how they direct us and how much they empower us.
And also, I think in today's world, I think in today's world where fees are generally contracting for artists, the IP becomes much more important in the long term, the ongoing ownership and rights and royalty income that the artists will receive from their work.
Tell me more about this fees contracting for artists when the businesses go expanding. Why are artists' fees contracting?
I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think the marketplace is very fragmented. So while the overall pie may be expanding, each individual slice has a smaller piece. And I think it does come down to just the way to combat that is to be to have a much wider view than kind of what your individual piece is, but to look at the bigger picture, especially for actors and recording artists and writers and producers. Although for composers, it's interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, on a film, I think there's only 3 copyrights. There's the copyright for the film, there's a copyright for the script, and there's a copyright for the score. Usually, the studio model is that the studios keep the rights and own the copyright, and here in the States, the composer gets a certain portion of the royalties. I think in India it's changing now with the new copyright law, but on the few deals that I've made there, luckily we've been able, I think, to do creative deals where the artists have been able to retain a lot of the rights that they typically don't retain there.
Okay. Is there any question? If there's not, I'm going to ask one question. We'll wrap it up. Yes? No? So my question is, in a world where often in many, many things, virality represents success, where's copyright in the context of virality? Everything goes viral. That means it's all being pirated. And you say, you know, what I did went completely viral. It's all over the world. There's no copyright on that. What happens? How do you define it? How do you control copyright when you're actually saying, if it goes viral, it's so successful?
The way that I would respond to that is, you're right. If anything, you want everyone to copy you because that effectively means that you've been successful. But if you're not able to monetize how they're copying you, either you're independently wealthy and you don't care, or you have other plans. You know, I liken it back to the days where you would have to mail in to become part of a fan club, right? As an actor or a band or something. And they would send you some material, and you'd take that material and you'd put it on your walls, and then you draw pictures, and then you somehow try to make that your own. I think that technology has just enabled people to be increase the scope with which they can do that. You know, I'm not entirely sure that if people are out there copying you, that's more a sign of success, or are they trying to basically financially capitalize on what you've created? I think it's the earlier, not the latter. And of course, I think that there should be.
Anjula, you have some point, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's just a product of the internet. I don't think there's a lot you can do there. But the smart person finds ways to monetize things that you wouldn't have automatically thought of. So to give you an example of that, I mean, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Beats by Dre story that just sold to Apple. Well, I actually met Jimmy Iovine when he just founded the company, and the reason we sort of actually connected was because of a comment I made. So at the time, I just founded my own website, which was all around pop culture, and I was trying to go to all the labels and say to them, give me your music videos for free. And this is going back probably about 5 years, and they were all pushing for this penny per stream model, which really didn't make very much sense. But back in those days, like, the music video was there to promote the song so that people would then go and buy the song. But what was happening, obviously music sales were down considerably and people weren't buying the songs anymore, so they wanted to try and monetize these music videos. And I waltzed into Jimmy's office and I was like, look, you need to give me these videos for free. I'm opening up this whole new market for you, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, so how do you propose that we monetize these videos? And I said, well, I think if you're really smart, you develop products that you could sell in these videos, because when you think about these videos, these are pop culture influencers. People are learning how to dance from them, learning how to dress from them, learning everything from these music videos. This demographic, this core demographic that everybody's trying to sell to is looking at those videos. And he looked at me and he laughed, and of course later on he'd put all his Beats by Dre products in those videos, and he just sold it for $3 billion to Apple. So my view is you've got to think outside the box, and you've got to be smart, and you've got to figure out how you're going to use that buzz and that virality, as you're talking about, and sell products.
You should be getting Priyanka Chopra to wear more clothes than less in your videos. So, anyway.
No comment.
Speak for yourself, Shekhar.
We are running 3 minutes behind, but...
Okay, no, we're done. I mean, I think there's a later session that talks about, are we replacing IP with brand? And that's a whole new question. Is that what IP is, what the internet is doing? You're developing a brand and you find ways to monetize your brand rather than the product that you created. Okay, I think we're done. If there's any questions, we can all go to Lou and have coffee and come back right here. Right?
Oh, are we having a break now?
No, well, no.
No.
Okay. I can go to Lou.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine.
Thanks.
Because then we will have to, I think, indulge in what is called violation of human rights, but that's not the subject of discussion today. Okay. Should we have the next panel? But of course,
thank
I
you
would
very
like
much.
to give a big round of applause.